We will now move on to our next session, session 4, which is financing. What do IFIs need to see from models and policy analysis? Our chair for this session is Mark Howell. So Mark is a professor and program leader at Loughborough University, a principal research fellow of Imperial College, and a scientific advisory board member of the Payne Institute and editor-in-chief of Energy Strategy Review. He has published in Nature journals and coordinated leading efforts for the EC, United Nations, national governments, and industry. And with that, I'll pass the mic on to Mark.
Thank you very much, Naomi. That was, there's an expression that says that flattery will get you everywhere. Absolutely not flattery. Just thank you so much to the previous speakers as well. It's incredibly humbling to be able to work with and to hear from folk who have had to run countries and deal with issues as well as, you know, important efforts that span global technology development, continental development, and so on. So a big thank you. Bye, thank you, Johan. In this next session, we're going to pick up something that's particularly important and close to the heart of some of the tracks that have been set up inside of the summer school. Now, it's the case that recently a report was released by the Finance Ministers for Climate group. And one of the things that they point out in there is the importance of being able to look at long-term scenarios and then map those to fiscal impacts as well as to investment strategies and so on. And so this is something that's really important because we can develop lots of interesting scenarios. We can help to bridge the gap with policymakers and so on. But at the end of the day, one of the key things we need is finance. So how do we make sure that our modeling translates into the language of international finance institutions, to national ministries that release finance, or to ministries that develop the regulations that are needed in order to attract the type of finance that is sensible. So in this panel, we have some very, very interesting speakers, and I'd like to introduce our first. Georgios Avgerinopoulos works for Vivid Economics. He runs a global energy systems model. Incidentally, it's based in OSeMOSYS. He's also we've had the privilege of being able to work together. Vivid Economics is a subsidiary of McKinsey. Naomi is just reminding me to name drop over here. And some of the work that they're doing is designed to be able to speak to finance industry. So Georgios, over to you for your 10-minute intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's a great pleasure to be here. I thought I would present after Manuel, which would have been a great challenge to overcome, but luckily I'm presenting first, so I'm gonna give it my best shot. Just first, let's start with some logistical issues. I need to share my screen, and as an old school guy, obviously I'm gonna struggle a bit. So open share tray, I'm assuming. I need to share just PowerPoint, not the whole screen. How's that possible, guys?
Give it a go, Georgios. Otherwise, just shoot off your presentation, and we can run it from here.
Okay.
So top right hand side is an icon that says share.
Yeah. Okay. Now it's working. Now it's working. It's working. All right. So with a conservative estimate of about 100%, if you decide to follow a modeling path, any sort of computational modeling path, at some point in your life, you're going to hear the quote, no model, all models are wrong, but some are useful. Now, this notion needs to go. When it comes to the finance sector, and when it comes to interacting with people who invest billions of dollars or any other currency in a particular sector, and they need insights from you saying, yes, my model is not super accurate and this is just an indication, doesn't work. That practically means that the quality of the model needs to be outstanding. And there are certain things that one needs to follow. I try to summarize those into four key aspects. So the first one that the finance folk want to see in your model really is a sense of realism in scenario making, and I'll give a few examples. Many models, especially when they come from the so-called research slash academic world, great models, really high quality, they tend to focus more on what should happen in order to, for example, reach a 1.5 degree scenario or a 1.8 degree scenario, rather than what might be realistic. And oftentimes you might see, for example, models spitting out some carbon prices of $1,000 or even $2,000 per ton of CO2. That will never happen because no society would ever accept prices like that. So a sense of realism, for example, would be to say what good societies accept. Is it some high prices? Or, for example, is it that because governments couldn't impose such high prices, they would end up banning ICE vehicles or banning gas boilers and things like that? So obviously, when you construct your scenario, this is something that you should definitely take into account. On top of that, the role of geopolitics. Most models tend to make certain economic projections because, let's face it, these are obviously economic but technical models as well. And they just make economic projections based on what is the cost of optimal solution. But there are certain constraints which are a bit hidden. What is the role of geopolitics? Is there going to be augmented trade between certain regions, or maybe reduced because of certain incidents that we can see unfolding in front of our eyes? The other thing which is quite important is the coverage, both from a sectoral point of view and from a geographical point of view. And I'll give some examples. If you do a model, let's say an excellent model of the power sector of the UK, chances are that you're going to miss things like the carbon budget, because if you assume that the carbon budget for the power sector is 3 gigatons of CO2, then naturally that's going to end up in a situation where you don't know what the other sectors are going to do. And if there is competition across sectors, is it going to be mainly on industry or is it going to be mainly on power? So for that reason, it's always it's necessary, I would say, to look at things holistically. And this is something that the finance people always stress. So always make sure that you've got certain, that you cover the whole economy when it comes to the sectors that you're representing. And also geographic coverage. It's not enough to say I'm representing the UK or I'm representing Germany or the US, because as we know, the key question when it comes to scenario development is decarbonization, and decarbonization is a global problem, and we cannot just assume that certain countries will follow their own path, disregarding what might happen in other regions. The third aspect, which finance folk tend to stress a lot, is transparency. And I guess here there are two major aspects. The first one is transparency when it comes to the code that you're using. There are many excellent models out there which are not open source, and they've been used a lot, and their insights are considered credible and they've been taken into account. However, this is changing. When it comes to when you present your model, your insights to someone who happens to have certain understanding of economic modeling, might not be as high as yours when it comes to energy modeling, but they do understand modeling and they will understand what's going on. If they ask you, what is your energy balance equation, or how are things, how does your model build storage capacity, then this is something that you should be able to share. And the same goes for your assumptions. If you say my cost of heat pumps is, I don't know, $500 per kilowatt, obviously you're gonna get challenged a lot. So it's not enough to just say that I came up with some data, or I just found certain data in one source and I just used it. You need to be able to triangulate your data. You need to be able to compare your data and come up with a fair approach, which will support your evidence, basically. And now the last one is a thorough QA. All models are wrong, but some of them can be fixed, I would say. It is the case that when you model, it's impossible not to make mistakes, and you should admit that you make mistakes. And it is important that before a potential investor, a finance guy, challenges your model, you have challenged your own model. And you have a very thorough QA process of both your input and mainly your output. You try to see what could be going wrong, and then it's important to keep a QA log where you basically explain how you have addressed all those issues. Now, keeping all those things in mind, I would just like to briefly talk about a fairly recent project that we've done at Vivid Economics called IPR, Inevitable Policy Response, which was sponsored by a bunch of institutes, financial institutes, whose purpose was to finally get some insights which have a sense of realism, as I mentioned earlier on, which don't just tell you what markets should do, but what markets might do, and therefore plan their actions accordingly and know where to invest their money, really. So in order to do that, we, as Vivid Economics, undertook the modeling part, and we used our OSeMOSYS model in order to give insights for two particular scenarios. One called required policy response, which is, okay, what we should do in order to reach a 1.5 degree scenario. And the other one is the forecasted policy response, where we try to give it a sense of realism after speaking with multiple governments and multiple policymakers across the world. And we try to predict what sort of policies might be actually implemented and what they might entail for the economy, really. And with that in mind, we used we implemented all those policies into our model, and we came up with certain conclusions, which have been shared in various reports. But I would say that the key features of these models are that this is a high conviction policy-based forecast. It's not just, we assume that if you want to curb emissions in the transport sector, you just need to ban ICE vehicles by 2030. There's a bunch of things at play. So, for example, are you going to ban ICE vehicles completely, or are you going to switch to maybe synthetic fuels or biofuels? Things like that. Then it's fully transparent in terms of policy deployment of key technologies, and it covers a full range of options, such as negative emissions coming from either bioenergy, CCS, or DAC, direct air capture. And obviously, it covers every region. The model covers 21 regions. 12 of them are major economies, while the other 9 are aggregate groups of various aggregated regions of various countries. Sorry for the background noise from my balcony. I apologize for that. And I guess the other thing is that in order to use this model and get some credible carbon budget for our scenarios, we also did a parallel land study where we managed to understand the impacts of land use and the impacts of potential food choices and land use changes on the system in order to have a holistic view and try to allocate a, let's say, carbon budget to the energy sector more sensibly. I'm going to stop here, and I don't know, what is the setup? Are we taking questions now, or is it going to be at the end?
Thanks, Georgios. We'll pick the questions up at the end, and thank you for the challenge. Just to point out that even though we know models are wrong, to make sure that they're realistic enough, and we take responsibility, ensure transparency, and some level of accountability for what gets done. And I think that's a really nice challenge to all of the government analysts and others that are in the school. Also, to point out that it's the case that increasingly financial institutions are taking and absorbing this kind of information. This is at a very high level. So if I could ask folks just give Georgios a quick round of applause. Thank you much. And without mentioning my mistake, with the scheduling. I'll move on to Dr. Manuel Welsh, who is also from the International Atomic Energy Agency. The IAEA are providing a set of tools and resources for this, this school, as are a number of others. And a particular tool that's really important in this process is something called FinPlan. And what we've been working through is in these various tracks is to look at how to get data together, how to do energy investment scenarios, how to make sure there's coherence along different resources, so land, water, and so on. But then once projects have been identified and they've gone through this rigorous screening and testing through the scenarios, to develop simple financial plans around these, so to understand the role of blended finance, the role of international finance institutions, local funding, and so on. And so it's really nice to be able to integrate this aspect into the overall modeling and have a very important arrow in the quiver for modelers. And I'd like to hand over to Manuel now for the next 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, for the introduction. I think you can see my screen.
Yes.
So just to start this presentation, I would like to point out that the IAEA is not financing projects, but we support energy planning. We support our member states in the energy planning, which of course should inform the decision making and ultimately lead to projects on the ground. And I was asked to present a bit how multiple tools can be used jointly to support this decision-making process. If we start off, let's say, a simplistic view of this decision-making process, we have strategic goals like the SDGs, which are reflected in national priorities and vice versa. For example, to diversify the economy or to support economic growth in a country, which is then translated into sector policies like energy policies for these various strategic targets, which are translated into plans and programs, how to implement the policies, which again, we want to lead to projects, to the development of financeable projects, to the implementation of these projects, and of course, the operation of these projects. In reality, the decision-making process is, of course, not as straightforward. We have an information flow backwards, and of course, we have the clues track as part of this summer school. We have interaction with other policies, for example, climate, land, water. And the key tool to include these environmental concerns into the policy making is a strategic environmental assessment. At the IAEA, our support on energy planning is roughly positioned in this space centered around the energy planning and the energy program. So we are not directly supporting the development of energy policies. We are in general not supporting, like, let's say, sealing financial deals for projects, but we're a bit in between. The support we provide should, of course, inform the development of energy policies on the one hand side, and it should as well lead to the development of financeable projects. That's in general energy planning terms. If we talk about nuclear power, our mandate goes further. We have the IAEA milestones as this three-step approach to support member states from developing a national position on nuclear power to contracting to building and to implementing the nuclear power plant. But I want to focus on the blue part, on the energy planning support. For this, one tool is usually not enough. And in this summer school, we covered EBS and we covered MIDE, looking at energy balances and demand assessment as an important starting point. And maybe a starting point, especially with the demand assessment, which sometimes I believe doesn't get the attention it deserves compared to the supply assessment. On our side, we use Message for this together with ESST and WASP. But essentially, that's the same as OSeMOSYS, which was covered in one of the tracks here. And I think this this area from demand and supply modeling. That's what we usually have in mind when we talk about energy planning. We can go in further depth, for example, as the clues track does. And what I want to focus on in this session is, of course, a bit FinPlan. Those who have worked with MAED in the summer school, those who have worked with OSeMOSYS, they will have had a look at how to structure the energy system from the resources on the left-hand side to the consumption on the right-hand side, from the processes on the top level to the fuels at the lower level. So importing, for example, oil, to refine it and to use it in power plants to generate electricity, which is being transmitted for final consumption, to end-use devices which provide a useful energy service. So one tool is, or one essentially important, is energy data, energy statistics. With energy balances, we cover the energy flow from the primary energy demand to the final energy demand, providing a snapshot essentially of how energy is being provided and is being consumed in the economy. This is the starting point for our demand analysis, where we go further to the useful level, which again is an input to the supply analysis, where we use message. In this track, OSeMOSYS was being used, and some would say that this supply analysis can also be extended to cover at least elements of the demand analysis. Now, with this approach, we can develop an energy plan, we can develop energy studies, but essentially they just show a pathway to the future. Another question, and this has partly been raised as well before, also by Georgios, is the question if these are realistic pathways. Do they represent a plausible, do they represent a likely future? If the analysts do a good job in their work, equally important, are the results interpreted correctly by the reader? Are they being communicated clearly enough so that the messages are understood the way they are intended? We all know that we can easily manipulate the model. We can easily force a technology into the model. And for some scenarios, this will also make sense to look at what happens if the share of whatever technology is above a certain percentage. But then, of course, the recipient also needs to interpret this correctly. What we want with policymaking, what we want is these models to inform policymaking, and policymaking to result in realistic projects, to result in projects on the ground. And energy planning is one thing, and project implementation is essentially another. And I've seen energy plans which were actually, they were well done, but they were representing a government strategy which was highly ambitious, leading to a significant economic growth, extremely ambitious. Then of course also the energy demand follows. But if project implementation then would really match this significant increase, and if the real demand on the ground will actually match this assumed ambition of the government, that's a separate question. For project implementation, what we need is the financial environment to support the project implementation. And this is also what we discussed in the FinPlan track, the difference between the economic assessment and the financial analysis. With these long-term models, we analyze what is best for the society overall. We maximize social welfare. With the financial analysis, we then check if the project is actually realistically implemented. And there can be a mismatch. We can have a model telling us this would be the perfect mix of technologies, but then when we further zoom into the financial analysis, we see that actually the financing may be very tricky and maybe very challenging, so that we may want to choose another technology than the one recommended from the optimization modeling process. So one could say that this financial assessment is kind of a reality check of energy planning efforts. Is this energy plan realistic? Can it be financed? Thinking more from a private sector perspective, we are looking at where is the money coming from essentially? How is the project structured? Where is the debt coming from? Where is the equity coming from? How are the operating costs covered? So is it a profitable project overall? And with this, we can kind of, I would also say, also sanity check the energy systems planning process overall to see if this can result and what are the conditions for this to result in concrete projects on the ground. So essentially, what a financing institution wants to see is obviously a project in line with their own financing strategies. That's an obvious statement. At the same time, for some technologies, this means it will get very tricky to get financing depending on the financial institutions. For renewables, this will be less of a problem, but if you want to finance a coal power plant, that's another story. Who would finance this? They also want to see a committed project developer and an environment that is supporting this project. So essentially, they want to see a project that is in line with a country's strategy, which that's again relates to this broader energy modeling effort. And they also want to see a project developer who is behind this project. And why do they want to see this? Simply because as a bank, they want to finance the project and they want to make sure it makes sense. They want to give you some money and they want to ensure that you repay the money. So if something goes wrong, they want to ensure that the project developer is committed to the project. He put his own money into this project so that he will find a solution if something goes wrong to improve the project. They also want to ensure that it's in line with the country's strategy so that it does not only meet a current demand right now, but it will also meet a demand in 5 years from now, in 10 years from now, because they want to see their debt being repaid. They want to see that there is sufficient cash there to repay the loans. And sometimes we have the situation that the electricity price is in one currency and the loan is in a foreign currency. And then there can be a mismatch if the local currency loses in value. And there are several of these indicators we can look at, like the debt service coverage in this regard. Essentially, what they want is they want to see that the risks are being managed well. So the project should be financially stable. It should be able to cover its future costs. Of course, it should be able to repay the loans. Basically, they want to ensure that once they have assessed the project, once they have provided the money to the project, they don't need to worry about it again. They just want to see the repayment flows. And for this, they need to do this checks in the beginning to look at these ratios, at these securities, to check if there's protection against the default, if there are guarantees in place to lower the risks on their side. So with FinPlan, for example, it's quite a simple tool. It's a tool at the pre-feasibility stage, but it can help us to understand what are the different positions of a lender, what ratios does a lender look at, what ratios is a project developer interested, what does the government, and to find the compromise between these different positions. For example, the lender, I mentioned the debt service coverage ratio as one of these ratios. For the project developer, this is of much less interest. They will be more interested in what is actually the net present value, what is the internal rate of return. On the other hand, from the government's perspective, they will rather be interested in what is the electricity tariff. If it's a power purchase agreement, what do we need to pay? How can the consumers finance this? So essentially, this can provide a better understanding of the policy, the market, the financial environment, and is the very, very first step towards negotiating a financial deal, I would say. But the key conclusion from this presentation is, I think that you really need to apply a suite of tools to properly analyze a project or a strategy from multiple angles to be sure that actually what you plan leads to a project in the very end. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Matthew Welsh, thank you very much indeed. That was very useful, and a shout out to the IAEA where this tool has been put in as part of the suite of tools that the modeling crews get to work with and so on. And it's one of the tracks that you can pick up. And particularly useful for then going on and, as you say, starting discussions with banks, international finance institutions, concessionary financiers, national treasury, and so on. And we're incredibly privileged as our next speaker to have Monica Gullberg from the Green Climate Fund, who's been working across this entire space, from developing, from working with governments to developing projects to working in sort of development finance generally, working with important development agencies such as the Swedish International Development Agency, and now on the other side, almost in the GCF, where people are taking this information and applying for finance and so on. And so, Monica, the next 10 minutes are yours. Please tell us what you need to hear from folk as they approach you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for welcoming me to this interesting session. I've been enjoying to listen to the previous speakers. I'll share my screen because I did prepare some slides. The main reason for this is we're such a new organization. So one of the questions we often get is, how can you find more information about us? How can you reach us? What do we do, etc. So we are the Green Climate Fund. We're based in Korea. My name is Monica Gullberg, and I'm a senior renewable energy specialist in Division for Mitigation and Adaptation. And we are very reachable. Just Google us and take contact. We happen to be the world's largest climate fund. We were set up by the UNFCCC to serve the Paris Agreement. And our aim is to support developing countries to transition into low emission, climate resilient societies. We have the current portfolio commitment is $10.4 billion. But as we work with co-financing and catalyzing capital, we can also proudly present that we are catalyzing another 28 billion, so that our portfolio value, including co-financing, is $38.8 billion invested in developing countries. So how do we work? We are country driven. We have readiness programs, it's grant funded programs directed towards the countries and their national designated authorities as assigned by UNFCCC. We make sure that our country programming is aligned with the country priorities. We do have a lot of partners, and our setting is partnership oriented. That means we have a number of accredited entities, including many of the MDBs, but also local banks and other prominent institutions in all different kinds of areas for climate finance. It's not only about energy, but we do have several good entities on board working with energy as well. We can provide a range of financing instruments. We leverage blended finance and we support piloting for new financial structures. And the different instruments that we have and can provide include, of course, loans, grants, but also equity contribution to investments, and we do also provide guarantees. Of course, we most oftenly, or I would say always, co-finance together with others as well. So in any risk taking, we will always be asking for a little bit of a co-financing from either the government or the project investor. we have a target to be balanced when it comes to mitigation and adaptation. So much of the energy investments that we do tend to be focusing on mitigation. But as a whole, our portfolio is focusing on both adaptation and mitigation. And interestingly enough, I think we see right now developing more and more focus on resilience and adaptation also when it comes to energy planning, which I think is very useful. The type of contributions we do and the type of capital we provide is should be and is still very risk-taking and patient. We're taking high risks. We accept higher risks to support early stage project development than other financiers do. And we provide concessionality. We provide very good terms for governments and also for private sector. However, we should not be crowding out any other financial institutions. I'll come back to that also. So in summary then, and for us financing energy transition, we are the world's largest climate fund and we serve the Paris Agreement. So we're definitely interested in investing in low carbon energy. And we use a flexible range of financing instruments. And we do base our financing on the country needs and complement other financiers. When we contribute money, there must be a clear additionality to what our funds contribute in addition to other financiers. It must be clear that we contribute to either climate adaptation or climate mitigation. And this is where we start to have very, very high expectations on the modelers, because system solutions, including, for example, grid capacity and storage investments in the system, while we know they can enable low emission electricity for more end users, which would be our aim, we also know that it can be very difficult for countries to estimate and monitor impacts from these investments in system solutions and to present that to us. And that's why we support discussion on forward-looking and transparent methods to help unlock investments in flexible and reliable energy systems, such as this one. So we have, you can find that on the webpage. We have energy sector guidelines for our priority investment areas. We are very inclusive and we don't have very strict criteria. So even if we present guidelines, we will always be reviewing proposals based on the country priorities. But in broad terms, our aims and our priority pathways are low energy generation, low emission energy generation, reliable energy transmission, distribution and storage, and also the promotion of access to clean energy. And I think that's very uncontroversial. So, but what will we wish from I'm saying not only from modeling, but from governance and modeling. First of all, I would wish that modelings focus on demand rather than supply. I think we see very much modeling focusing on supply still, whereas we know that it is the demand that will drive the development, at least in developing countries where much of the new investments will happen. We would wish to see more of a system transition. I can say that a grand part of our current portfolio is IPPs or decentralized green mini grids that are special purpose vehicles or ring-fenced investments that are very easy to calculate the financial internal return for and very straightforward. But what we really would like to see is investments on a system level. And to reach there, we think it can be very useful if governments create financing mechanisms that vitalize longer-term planning, 10, 15 years strategic energy systems planning at a national governmental level. And of course, with the NDC targets acknowledged, I would say mostly looking beyond NDC targets, because NDC targets are still not always ambitious enough, I would think. In such a financing mechanism, I would look to, I would appreciate if countries could have some kind of carbon pricing. This does not have to be international carbon pricing. It can be voluntary carbon pricing, or just a certificate of origination with the country. But that just something that keeps track and monitors the actual carbon footprint from energy. Our approach would be to de-risk key risk takers in the value chain, because in different markets this can be very different. It can be private sector IBPs. It can also be the end users if the tariff is very commercially designed so that the end users pay everything. It can be the utility. It can be the government. It can be different risk takers that would need support to overcome their risk. I think it would be very useful for most countries to establish a governance unit. We've been listening to different modeling tools and to input data, etc., which I think is very important. But I would also think that it's important to have in your country an ongoing monitoring and governance unit that actually follows up on things like carbon footprint, pricing, fuel development, tariff development, etc., because that creates the actual fact for your specific market, and it creates a good benchmarking tool. So why is this important? I think because if you don't have a strong trajectory and a carbon pricing mechanism in place, it can be more justifiable to contribute concessionary climate finance to investments in power interconnectors and other system enablers. Without a trajectory, it tends to become very difficult to invest in system solutions, because you would never know whether it's going to lead to a positive climate result or not. If you build an interconnector and it turns out in 2 or 3 years or 5 years time, it's only increasing the use of carbon or fossil fuels, it's not going to be very positive for climate finance here. With the system planning, I also would like to mention that the demand side interventions can come clearer. For example, investments in grid or infrastructure resilience to climate change. And if we talk about energy systems, typically the cooling needs, the resilience for earthquakes and storms, wildfires, floods, droughts, and also the end users' resilience, where, for example, if you look at the many people that still don't have access to energy, it will be fundamental for them to have energy for information, such as early warning systems, and also for some of the food security, water security, and cooling needs in the future. Which would then, I would say, with the long-term planning, you will have a better understanding of the adaptation and resilience results also. What are the major challenges then for financing system solutions? To get back to the challenge of presenting a climate rationale, I think this is really a challenge, and I think this is where modelers can really provide a solution. If someone like ourselves would like to invest in beyond an ITP or beyond a specific project, we would need to understand the impact and the climate mitigation and adaptation impact from this investment. The other challenge for us and for the economy as a whole and for the developing countries as a whole is to attract more private investors into systems investments. Grid investments and other high-level infrastructure investments are typically still public finance heavy. And for many of the developing countries, there is a limit, already reached limit on their indebtedness, and they are not capable of taking more sovereign loans to invest in their systems. And for the private sector to invest in systems rather than only IPPs and ring-fenced projects, they will need to understand the financial benefit from doing so, and they would benefit very much from having different business models and market models up and running so that they can secure their revenue. And also maybe ask us to contribute if there is a risk that they're not willing to take. That's our aim, to be de-risking. So just because we are such a new organization, I also wanted to include this slide where you can find more information, how to follow us on Twitter, how to follow us on LinkedIn, how to find our annual reports, and so forth. And please do reach out to us directly or to your NDA in your country. All countries has an NDA and they are aware of us, I'm quite sure. But they are not always aware of the energy sector politics. They can be more interested in the agriculture or ecosystems management sometimes. So thank you very much from me. Welcome questions.
Thank you very, very much indeed to all three of our speakers. And I just want to pick up a point of Monica's very quickly. There are many folk representing energy ministries and other ministries here. Your port of call, which would be really useful, is your National Designated Authority, your NDA. And please do have a look at the documentation that Monica and so on provided. Later on in the day, it is the case that we have presentations from some colleagues from Costa Rica who started with this transparent modeling, have included a lot of sectors, they've made it robust, they have a process to speak to policy, and as a result, they've managed to get so-called readiness funds and market preparation funds from the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, and they have project applications to the GCF. So just important, if you want to know how to take these models and plans and translate them into to finance, there are some really important routes, and the GCF is very important there. We've reached the end of the session, but I would like to offer the speakers just 30 seconds to make some closing remarks, and also just a very sort of say that this is much appreciated and a very important link to go from the national policy making through to finance. So maybe if in the order of presentations, Georgios, Manuel and Monica, if you could have the last word, that would be perfect. Thank you.
Thanks everyone, and thanks to the other fellow speakers. It was indeed a great experience to be in this panel. I think the common denominator across the three presentations is that there's a great need for augmented realism and quality of modeling, and this is what I think the participants of this school should take away. Really, thank you.
Thanks, Georgios.
Maybe also looking at one of the questions in the chat or Slido, which was voted up, how to address that we can't be holistic with a single model, and what are the first gaps to address in the implementation and communication to make it less wrong and more robust? Because I think this question relates very much to at least my presentation, also the one from Georgios, and actually also a point which Monica mentioned, the emphasis on the demand side modeling. So I think a first point is to form a group of experts to come together in a group. So no expert on its own can analyze the entire energy system. No model on its own can do this. No institution on its own can do this, because the knowledge is simply so diverse, and the various development strategies, they really spread across different institutions in the country and different ministries. So the expertise is really quite diversity is required, especially for the demand side assessment. I would say even more than for the energy assessment, but even for this, the Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of Energy, when you look at CO2, the Ministry of Agriculture. So the key point is institutionally to form a modeling group which has the financing, which has the human capacities to develop this process from data collection to the assessments and to the publication of regular energy studies, which, as they get updated over the years, become better and better and more realistic and more solid in their analysis.
Thank you, Manuel, and over to you, Monica, for the last word.
Thank you very much. I apologize for not being very well read on the representation in the audience, but I take it you are energy seniors and have some say in the country's development. My message would be to think bold and think long-term investments. We know climate change is happening. We know the temperatures will be rising in many of your countries. And there are a few other things that we know. And please do develop rationales for investing in climate resilience systems. I have not seen that very much so far. I have a question in the chat also if I have any good modeling. I'm afraid not very much. What we see is mostly investments in IPPs. We see CDM rationales, clean development mechanism, which is fine, it's technically correct, but it's basically saying we are going to invest in renewable energy because we're going to contribute to the global mitigation. I think for developing countries, there is much more to say. Why you would like to have a resilient power system. It's not only to contribute to the global mitigation. That's my message. And thank you for having me here.
Monica, thank you very much. So, Monica, Emmanuel, and Georgios, we're going to give you a big round of applause right now. And just appreciate the trouble very much and the challenges to a large number of important energy modelers and others that want to see change inside of their country. So thank you very much. We're going to take a short break.